Hi, good evening, everybody. This is Rico Manalo with another episode of All Aces on Air. Tonight, I have a very, very special guest, my friend, Bren Bataclan. He is a Boston-based artist who is behind the Smile Project. So if you've ever run into like a smiling canvas just sitting there on a park bench, it might be that you found one of Bren's works. In addition to his great work in the arts, he also does murals at a lot of schools. He has kind of created, not kind of, he has created the Boston Filipino American Bookclub, which, for full transparency, I am a part of. In fact, we are meeting this Saturday at 6:30, correct?
It's now moved to 7.
Oh, okay. Well, I just found that out, so that's the latest information. And we will be discussing a short story from Grace Talusan, who is actually also the sister of Liza Talusan, who some of you might remember from a past episode. So today we're going to be talking about a lot of things, about art. We're going to be talking about books and Filipino American identity from the eyes of somebody who was an immigrant and now an American citizen, and somebody who was born here in the US. That would be me. So how's it going, Bren?
Going really well. Thanks for having me. And our experiences is totally different because you grew up in a part of the country there were no Filipinos, and I moved to part of the United States where I literally said, "Did we move?" because everyone around me is Filipino. It said it was kind of cool. I mean, it's kind of cool, but our experiences, our childhood experiences, are the complete opposite.
Yeah. So to clarify a little bit further, my parents got to the U.S. in the 80s, and somebody told my father that the winters in New Hampshire were not that bad, and so that's where I grew up. I don't know who that person was, but this is on your head. So let's open things up a little bit for the audience. A lot of people these days do know Filipino people. They might have encountered them in different places, but there's a lot of confusion. So, for example, the spellings of things. The name in English is the Philippines with a PH. But what we call ourselves, like how somebody would refer to you and me, that would be Filipino with an F. So I don't know if we can clarify some of that confusion for our viewers.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the letter F doesn't exist in our alphabet. And so a lot of Filipinos have a hard time saying Filipinos instead of Filipino. And I think it's easier for like Americans to like say Filipino than Filipino. That's why we are called Filipino. Yeah, instead of Filipino. Yeah.
Thank you for exaggerating the accent there. That was helpful. I think there are a lot of things that people don't really know about Filipinos. We don't have like a Filipino town in the sense that there are many Chinatowns in the world. Although on the West Coast, as you mentioned, in Daly City, it's populated by a lot of Filipino people, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of the reason why we don't form our own kind of like Chinatown because most of us speak the language, and also most of us are Christians or Catholics, and so we can assimilate a lot easier, like in comparison to like other immigrants. And I think that's part of the reason why we don't really need to have that kind of grouping.
No, that's a good point. A lot of people don't really know that, in fact, the Philippines was a colony of the U.S. for 50 years.
Yes.
So most people actually do speak English. They might be shy to speak English, but they do speak it well enough and can read it for the most part.
Yeah.
A huge advantage if you are somebody immigrating to the U.S., for example. So let's kind of talk about your immigrant story a little bit. Can you walk us through that a bit?
Yeah. So my grandfather fought alongside with the Americans during World War II. And so after the war, he moved to California. Then eventually he petitioned or brought family members. So my grandmother, his 2 daughters, and his 2 sons. But my mom stayed because she was already married, and my dad was hesitant to move here because he knew that they would start all over again. And so we were supposed to be here prior to my birth, I believe. But then we eventually moved here in 1981, and he was correct. And so we pretty much, we had a 5-bedroom house. It was Philippine standard, like tiny room, but and then we moved to a 1-bedroom apartment. So he was correct. We had to start from scratch. Then my parents were already in their 50s, so
Wow.
it was a struggle. Yeah, it was. Basically, the only way I could have gone to college is, every day you have to get straight A's because there's no way we can afford it. So it was really good because I was also with other immigrants in Daly City. So it's predominantly Filipino, but I had Mexican American friends. My first friend actually was from mainland China, and I'm still really close friends with her. And
Wow.
and so there were kids from India, from just all over. But we were pretty much all in a similar situation that we had to get straight A's in order to go to college. So it was good. It was a
Yeah.
challenge, but I'm glad. I'm grateful for that experience.
So just to clarify things a little bit for people who might not know, Daly City is in California.
Yeah,
It's maybe not.
Northern California.
It's in Northern California. Yeah. So also kind of an interesting area for a lot of immigrants to be populating a city. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm eventually going to show slides of Daly City. Maybe we can start now.
Yeah. So we can
Yeah.
set the scene a little bit. We can show people Manila.
Okay, yeah. So this is Manila. This is where I was born. Actually, specifically Makati, which is the financial kind of district of the Philippines.
It's a
And
nice place in Manila.
say it again.
That's the nice part of Manila.
Yeah. So when I was born, that was still part of Manila. That's what I'm saying, Manila. Next slide, please. Yeah. So look at this. This is a photo of my family, maybe a year or two prior to our movie, or even the year that we moved. I'm not really sure, but that's my dad with the super plaid 70s pants, bell bottom. That's my mom, and then my older brother, my older sister, and I'm the youngest. So I'm there on the I'm the little kid. Next slide, please. And that's Daly City on an unusually non-foggy day. So Daly City is actually kind of known for its mid-century architecture. So it's very kind of George Jetson-like. But next slide, please. It is always foggy. So, okay, so that's a semi-foggy day. Next slide, please.
That's semi-foggy?
That's this is what it looks like all the time, most of the time. And so Filipinos ended up here because it was not a desirable place in the 60s because it was always foggy. So nobody wanted really to live there. And so during the brain drain of the 60s, when the U.S. asked for a lot of Filipino doctors, engineers, nurses, teachers, we moved here because it was really, really affordable, crazy affordable. But now, believe it or not, these houses from 50,000, some are going as high as $2 million. So yeah, because the Bay Area is just kind of nuts that way. So so this is Daly City, and it's perpetually foggy.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting place compared to the Philippines. Well, it does rain a lot there, but it's often very bright and sunny, lots of bright colors and everything. And this is the exact opposite of that.
Actually, a lot of Filipinos like it because it's cool. It's not, it doesn't snow, and so the weather doesn't really dictate your life. So I think Filipinos like it there eventually because it is really comfortable. Like it is all the whole year round. But unfortunately, because of global warming, there are a lot more heat waves now, and actually, it is on fire. Just this weekend, like a town, South San Francisco was on fire, which is really scary. So it is changing, unfortunately.
Mm.
Yeah.
So what was it like to grow up in Daly City? I know at the top you said that it wasn't, you were kind of asking like, well, did we even move? But it
Yeah,
might have been.
it was. It was great actually because it was really really easy. Because I saw myself everywhere. You know, there are lots of Filipinos everywhere. Like I moved there and my classmates were Filipino. Their businesses are Filipino. Then eventually the mayors were Filipinos. So it was good. You know, it's an easy transition. Plus, San Francisco has a very you are accepted
Mm.
no matter who you are. And it was just unspoken, but most folks felt that way. So it was really, I feel really fortunate growing up in the Bay Area. Like I didn't have a problem. It was beautiful. Like I just felt welcome from day one. No complaints.
So culturally speaking, I'm guessing that there were a lot of Filipino stores and things like that. So were you seeing like a blending of Filipino and American cultures?
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Yes. Yeah. Both. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just kind of thinking to myself, like, what would my reaction have been as a child? Because honestly, the first time I saw a population of entirely composed of Filipinos was the first time I went back to the Philippines. And my mother likes to talk about my reaction stepping onto that plane because I couldn't believe that this entire plane was filled with people who looked like me. You know, I'd never seen that before.
That's sort of like, I'm not exaggerating. When I moved to Ohio, to go to grad school, and I went to a Taco Bell or like fast food restaurant, and everyone behind the counters were white, and I was the only person of color. It was sort of, I guess, that reversal experience of going, wow, I'm really not in California anymore, because yeah, it was like everyone's white, and yeah, because you never see that in California. It's really really rare. So yeah, so we sort of have this reverse experience.
What I love about that story that you told just now is it's like you didn't experience culture shock until you went to Ohio.
Yeah, it's true in a lot of ways. I actually have some artwork that I can speak to that. So if you can go back to the slide. So this is part of my traveling exhibit called Kulap. So Kulap means fog in Tagalog or Filipino, and it's not a common. Most Filipinos would not know what Kulap means because it doesn't. And fog doesn't really exist there. But I researched it, and Ulap means cloud, and Kulap means fog. And so my exhibit's called Kulap, and it's fog because it's not just the literal meaning of the fog. It's also being in the haze or fog of the whole entire thing. Because this show pretty much started right after the 2016 election. So it has a lot to do with that. But this is me with my family in Daly City. So you can see all these kind of George Jetson colorful houses in the back. And what's also fun about this this exhibit of mine is I was trying to render fog or like try to find a way to paint fog. And I've never painted fog before. So it took me a couple of weeks. And I finally said, maybe spray painting will do. So I used spray paint for the very first time to like render fog. So in the background, that is spray paint, my first use of spray paint.
Okay, because I was wondering, I didn't see any brush strokes. And of course, this is a reproduction of the image, but
yeah, it's spray paint. Yay! Street girl.
Looks great. You probably, done more paintings on walls than most graffiti artists, actually.
Yeah, actually, well, okay. There's a big difference. I paint murals and schools. I mean, I make this I emphasize this because I mostly paint in elementary schools. So like I have tell the kids, I have permission. This is a mural. If you start drawing or painting on your wall at home, that's vandalism. So there's a fine line between okay and not okay. So yes, I paint a lot on walls, but I have permission on all of them. So next slide, please. So these two paintings, okay, so the one on top, it may be hard to read, but that's me as a kid, pretty much when I the next day after we arrived here, I had started fifth grade, and so I was asking myself, did we really move? Because I don't see any white people and I don't see snow. So that was my impression of the United States, was that it'll be filled with white people and snow. But I'm telling you, we had the complete opposite experience. I was like, did we move? Because I really felt like, it was a little cooler, but it wasn't the United States I was expecting. But
I mean, that's
yeah,
so interesting though, because I was an ESL teacher for a long time, and I would do an exercise where I would ask my students, like, well, what was your picture of the US before you got here?
yeah,
And every single one of them had so many associations. And what they found was, by comparing their ideas of what America was supposed to be like, in
yeah.
fact, there was nothing in common. And they kind of had to come to the conclusion that, well, America is a lot of different things, which I think is so easy to forget about, really, of anywhere that somebody is from. But in the US, I forget about it all the time.
Yeah. Oh, and then at the bottom of that is me and my cousins in McDonald's. And so I spoke English fluently. Like, in fact, I was placed in the highest English class when I moved here. But I did have an accent. And so that was those are my cousins torturing me, saying, Bren, say French fries, not French fries. It's not 55. It's not 55, it's 55. So it was that sort of like, yeah, it was really embarrassing and painful, but it was a quick way to learn to like drop the accent, because yeah, it was terrible. I am still have PTSD from that. So
I'm sad to hear that. And to just, inject some of that language teacher stuff back into this current point, it's true, as Bren mentioned, that the letter F does not exist in Tagalog, which is the Philippine language, or one of the Filipino languages.
yeah.
But more than that, the sound does not exist.
Mm-mm.
So if you think about your mouth is all muscles and things like that. It gets like in shape for the sounds that you're using all the time. So trying to make sounds of other languages and getting frustrated is really common, but usually what's at the root of it is your muscles have not been able to connect to the sound to reproduce it the way that you're hearing it. So it is especially cruel to make fun of people for their accents. That's one thing that I want to highlight.
Also, the letter V for victory does not exist in our language, and so alphabet, and so like we say oben instead of oven, and then my middle name is Victor, so it's Victor. So that's another crazy thing. Like, why do I name something that doesn't even exist in our like Victor? It's not Victor, Victor. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so I was raised watching Sesame Street, Electric Company in the Philippines, so I was ready to be totally Americanized. But so like my parents were pretty cool about almost everything, but that was my dad and me. We were having dinner, and then he noticed me not using the spoon anymore, because I was, I was trying to just eat with a fork and a knife. So we are one of the few Asians that don't use chopsticks because of the Spanish influence. We use, the like metal utensils. So, and so I was trying to be more Americanized and not using the spoon. Then my dad got offended. That was one of the few times like, you're becoming too Americanized. Stop that. I'm like, Dad, I want to be a social pariah, so I got to learn.
I got to be honest, Brent, sometimes, when we can eat out at restaurants under normal circumstances, I will still ask for a spoon because like fork and knife is fine, but just fork, like I'm just pushing my food around the plate.
Exactly. And then plus, if there's rice, you can shovel a lot with a spoon.
That's right.
It makes it makes so much more sense. And then at the bottom, that was our apartment. And so it was sort of like a big role reversal. Like my dad didn't do any housework in the Philippines. And so seeing my dad washing dishes for the first time was like seeing a cat talk. It's like, what is going on? And then it's like my mom had to work. She never had to work in the Philippines. And so she was leaving the house. It was really confusing.
Mm. Yeah, I can imagine.
Yep. So next slide, please. All right. So another fun thing, well, not so fun. This is not as traumatic, but those kids at the top. So there's a white kid, and it was kind of funny and not so funny, but we were sort of identified growing up by our smells. You know, our home smell. And so like I would smell like sour adobo, and then some of the Asian kids would have like dried rice on them. Or, you know, it's so like that was us, you know, from different parts of the world. Like there's an Indian kid there, some Mexican kids, or Chinese American kid, and there's this white kid like kind of smelling. It's like, ooh, you like smell like your home. So it was sort of like pride and embarrassment at the same time. So yeah, like I had this other show that was based on the poem that I wrote about me bathing myself in Polo cologne, because I was asking myself as a kid, you know, like, okay, I look Filipino, I talk like a Filipino. I mean, like it's like I even smell like a Filipino, like, and it's like I would start to ask, like, how do I taste, like the other senses, because that's 3 out of 5 already. So yeah.
So it's like you were trying to mitigate your Filipino-ness through whatever sensory source you could.
Yes.
So you know, just reflecting on this, I mentioned that I didn't see an entire population of Filipinos until I was 7. So growing up, I didn't really have a clear understanding of what it actually meant to be Filipino. So something that you and I have talked about in the past is I'm not a visual artist, but I am a poet. And this has been something that like kind of has been woven through my work. And a lot of it is about me not understanding things, right? Because I've got family who are helping to shape how I see and think about the world. And half the time they're speaking a language that I can understand, but really don't speak very well. And so for me, like words and a lot of just being alive is just very confusing. And a lot of that is like me grappling with that. So I'm really curious about how you've taken, clearly you've done work based on your childhood, but how do we go from Bren the child to Bren the artist?
Oh, wow. Okay. So kids ask me this a lot because I work with lots of, elementary school kids. Like, how did you become a full-time artist? I just tell them that art has chosen me. Like some of them can play sports. I can't. So, pretty much as soon as I got hold of a pencil, I have started to like draw and be an artist, because that was how I kind of enabled myself to like feel good about myself, because I knew that I am artistically inclined and I got positive feedback. But even in high school, I didn't really take any art courses. I took a lot of sort of architecture and engineering stuff because my family was saying, you should be like your uncles. So I had that in mind, but I was the president of the art association after school. And so I was a civil engineer my freshman year in college, and I was really miserable. And I even had like an internship with Caltrans, the sort of like the DOT of Massachusetts, the Department of Transportation. And I can't read maps. I remember all my coworkers were saying, have Brent pinpoint the map. So I just said no to that. And I switched to design. And this was sort of like the introduction of the Apple computer to graphic design instead of cutting and pasting stuff. So my parents were pretty cool with that because, I started talking about computers and they heard computers. So that was like good enough. So I switched to graphic design. And it was great. And then for grad school, I did computer animation because George Lucas was just in the neighborhood, Lucasfilm, and I really wanted to work for him. And so after grad, I did have internships because I went to UCLA, and that was like Hollywood right there. So I did have a little glimpse of computer animation. And
Mm-hmm.
then I ended up moving here to like teach computer animation over at UMass Amherst. And then I joined the dot-com world. And then when the whole economy crashed 20 years ago, exactly, kind of like now again, I started to paint these characters that I've been drawing since I was a little kid because I didn't have a job. And I premiered them at an open studios here in our extra bedroom here. I turned this into like a gallery, and I painted 56 paintings, and 49 sold in 2 days.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was incredible. And to like thank Boston back, I started to give away paintings with a note saying, "This painting is yours if you promise to smile at random people more often." So I thought this project would last for 2 weeks, but it snowballed into a full-time job. One of the kind of unexpected things that I was asked to paint murals. I remember this teacher who I still work closely with, he's now a principal. He asked me like, "Hey, Bren, you painted murals before, right? This is my very first one." I said, how can you gain experience if you haven't not, done it before? So I said, yes, a resounding yes. But I didn't tell him not since high school. So it was like a mullet, it's a business on top. And like, I was like, yes, here. And I was shaking at the bottom because like, what did I put? But since then I painted close to 250 murals.
It's that many? Oh my God.
Yes. So that's pretty much, this is the story of my art career. And in the midst of that, more and more, I've been doing more Filipino related art. So recently, folks from the Filipino Artists Directory, we have an online exhibit, and I just did a piece about Daly City and how it was completely orange because of all the fires. And so that's my hometown ablaze. And I just did a piece for that. And so when I'm in my studio in Boston, that's what I mostly do, is just work for me for exhibits. And a lot of it's Filipino based, Filipino American based.
So, Bren, what is it about Filipino American identity or Filipino identity that keeps it fresh in your mind? Or like, why does it keep showing up in your work and in the many things that you do?
Okay, I can explain that with visual. So if we can go back to the slide, please. So, all right, so this is important. The top one was me in graduate school. So we were bowling, and I was with my whole bunch of graduate student friends. And so I lived in a graduate tower, and it was a different experience because obviously UCLA, most of my friends were Asians. But in grad school, it was a very international building, and there were Filipinos, but it was mostly non-English speaking group of folks. So like I ended up just hanging out with most of the Midwestern white kids. And so we went out bowling our first week there, and we were noisy, I have to admit, but I was singled out by one person to like be quiet. And I was kind of upset, like, you could have asked the other people, all the white, how come you singled me out? And then he became a super friendly Midwesterner, like most of them. He said, "What are you?" I said, "What?" So I said, "I'm Filipino." And he said, "Oh, no." He first asked me, like, he first said, "You don't look, you're not quite Chinese or Mexican. What are you?" I said, "I'm Filipino." And he said, "What's that?" So this was 1993, so close to 30 years ago. I'm sure Ohio's changed since then. But it was that was the catalyst of why I sort of became hyper Filipinos, because of that incident. I said, "Oh, the whole country needs to know who we are." So my graduate thesis became, focused on Filipino folk stories, and I animated a piece that's Filipino based, and that actually became my graduate thesis. So it was that day. It's just actually this painting that sort of kickstarted my whole like super Pinoy movement.
So for those at home who are not quite sure the word that Bren just used, Pinoy is what Filipino Americans sometimes call themselves, or sometimes people in the Philippines call Filipino Americans Pinoy. Just thinking about that experience that you had, that's actually definitely happened to me in the past. And it's happened enough that at some point in my life, I just kind of decided, well, if nobody knows what I am, I can be whatever I want. So in my head, I just started thinking of myself as ambiguously brown, which has been useful in a number of situations. But when I moved back to Boston, that's about the time that I was put in touch with, I think, with Grace Talusan through a friend from grad school. And that's how I got hooked up with BFAB in the first place. And I've mentioned this to you on a number of occasions, but growing up in New Hampshire, where there is most definitely not a hugely developed Filipino population, I really had not spent much time with Filipino Americans. Certainly, I've spent a lot of time with my family, but that's a little bit of a different experience than if you were born in the Philippines and you were really engaging with the culture firsthand. So it's been very interesting. And to explain about BFAB a little bit, it was introduced to me as a group of Filipino Americans who gather to read books that are written exclusively by, I think, by Filipino or Filipina American authors.
Yes. Only Filipino American authors. I mean, because there are a lot of them. We really want to support just the Filipino American authors. So like we don't even read books from authors in the Philippines. They have to be Filipino American only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've certainly appreciated it. I've gained a lot more insight into the Filipino American culture that does exist. Certainly, seems mostly to be in Western states or where there's a lot of other Asian immigrants also.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a real learning experience for me. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the genesis of BFAB and like how do you go from tech and art into saying, you know what, we need a book club.
Yeah. Well, it kind of all started when I was living in San Francisco. I was part of a Filipino American book club through like the San Francisco Public Library, and so I really miss that. And I know that there were a lot of Filipino American authors, and that we as Filipino Americans should read books about, like from our community. So in 2007, there were about maybe 7 of us who said, yes, let's do it. And also, this was a good kind of, 13 years ago. So these are mostly post-college folks, sort of like in the middle of post-college and, and really older folks. So somewhere in the middle that it was also like a good excuse to like cook and eat. So it's like initially just like an eating club, and it took us like a really long time to read our first book. And one thing great about COVID is that we are reading books like every single month. So that's a big change. And also we're meeting quite regularly, and we usually take a break during the summer, but because everyone's home, we continue during the summer. So to like kind of go back, it is just really to like support Filipino American author, and also to like give an excuse for folks, Filipino Americans here in Boston, to like gather and meet and have good food. And what's also like the unexpected things that come out is really a real community. So the past 13 years, there have been a lot of marriages, a lot of kids, and then we use each other's services. Like our like dentist is a member of ours. There are some architects, and we use their service. And there's one pediatrician, and so all of the kids go into like her practice. So it's a really nice community, and it's been 13 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I feel like it's also a good time to let our audience know that there's some cultural reverence for books among Filipinos, because the national hero of the Philippines actually fought against the Spanish by writing books, and the books were essentially parodying how ridiculous Spanish rule was. So that's very much in the DNA of Filipino and Filipino American identity. So for me, this is a nice way to kind of connect to that as well.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So,
Go ahead.
can I show a little bit more of my artwork? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Next slide, please. So, I also like in 2009, superstorms started to happen in the Philippines, and in 2013, I remember watching the news, and Brian Williams said the Philippines is about to experience the worst storm in recorded history, and I was devastated because, I was asking myself, what can a Filipino American here in Boston do? So for a couple of weeks, I was just sort of brainstorming, and I felt really helpless. Then I said, hey, why don't I have an exhibit about the Filipino American Filipinos experience during the superstorm or during that one superstorm. So I started to look at news clips, like both videos, online newspaper, and I tried to portray the resilience of the Filipino people, especially Filipinos and Filipinos helping each other out. So that's an actual photo of folks clinging on to electrical posts. And then on the left is my interpretation of that. Next slide, please. And these are pretty much the community saving a little boy, and that's my interpretation. Next slide, please. And Filipinos are known to make the best out of anything. So, even though it's totally flooded, people still seem to be having fun. I love that about us, because in the midst of misery, we can make it somewhat positive. Next slide, please. And not only were folks affected, also animals. So I highlighted that. I'm more of a cat person. So your photos just show dogs. I said, I'm going to put a kitten in the middle there. So there's a kitten right there. So I also am showing our love for animals. Next slide, please. Okay, so when I was in California, I formed another group. This is for other Filipinos who are in the graphic design field. So, I wanted us to define what our contribution in the graphic design world. So the Japanese and the Swiss, they have a definite look, and so we were trying to research what our aesthetic is for graphic design. So. A lot of things in the Philippines are, still handmade, wood. It's very organic. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, I started to treat text less on a rigid format and more sort of like vegetation. How it's so, things grow really fast in the Philippines. It's very lush, it's very green. So I started to treat text as vegetation. Next slide, please. Oh, and then we came up with this term, the order within chaos. So in a nutshell, in the Philippines, if you're going to afford a billboard to put on top of your house, no one's going to really stop you. You can do it. So it's kind of true in Asia, it's not subtle. Everything is neon and cute and bright. And so you really have to fight to be seen. But there's beauty in that. In a lot of ways, there's order. And so we're trying to use text the same exact way. Next slide, please. And then I started to incorporate our beautiful textiles along with my organic text, lots of wood. Next slide, please. And so once again, lots of vegetation, very green, very lush, very organic. Next slide, please. And that is the Alibata font or the text. And one thing really great, the Spaniards didn't expect the Filipinos to have their own written language, and we did. They've even tattooed on our skin, but we did have our own writing system, so I'm highlighting them here.
So a couple slides ago, there was an element to a piece that is written in the script that you're talking about, right?
Yep.
Yeah. One more, please, Miles. Yes.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, this wooden element that is connected by string, those are actually letters, I believe, yeah?
Yes. So that is a notebook. Let me see. We actually still have it right here. It is a piece that we were in Puerto Princesa in Palawan, and we got this amazing book. See? It's right here.
Yeah. Ah.
Yep. Not great, and even has that sort of gone. Yep. So yeah, so that is our Filipino design research with other Filipinos. Oh, and let me just quickly show you some BFAB pictures, the Boston Filipino American Book Club. So next slide, please. Oh no, this is really important. So this is 20 years ago. This was 20 years ago. So, and while doing that Filipino design research, I started to draw these characters that I've been drawing since I was a little kid. So without doing the Filipino design research, I probably wouldn't be painting these characters that's not my full-time job. So yeah, so this is a really important drawing because without this, I probably wouldn't be a full-time artist. So this is a very, very important illustration to highlight.
Wow. So this is like a stepping stone on you to transitioning into the professional world then.
Yes. So from that, next slide, please, to this. So you can sort of trace and see the kind of just mostly circular drawing. So this is called Liberty for All. And it's one of my few prints. So after the election, a family in Acton, Massachusetts asked me, Bren, we know that you paint murals. We will clear a wall for you and buy the biggest canvas you can find and paint how you feel about the election. So I'm glad I didn't paint right then and there. It took me about a month, and I tried to muster enough positive, energy, and so I painted the Statue of Liberty, comforting vulnerable people. So there's a Black Lives Matter person, there's a Jewish person, there's a Muslim woman, there's a Mexican American woman, there's someone from the LGBTQ community, there's a women's empowerment character, and there in the middle, that kid represents refugees. It's one of the it's that Syrian boy, the ambulance, the one who's kind of bloody. So yeah, so this is one of my few prints. It was like folks started to like ask if they can have a print version of it, and so yeah, so we have donated all of the proceeds to ACLU and also Planned Parenthood for this, and then for like my Baha'i exhibit, I raised $5,000 for like the Philippine Red Cross, and so I'm glad that I'm able to raise funds for organizations through my artwork.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
just given all the different directions that your mind has gone in, trying to understand what it is to be Filipino, what it is to be Filipino American, and even like what it is to be simply an American person. Like, what are some challenges that you're seeing the Filipino American community in particular kind of facing in terms of just being recognized as a group of people?
Wow. Yeah, because I think most folks don't even know that we are the second largest Asian group in this country. Like each time I share that, they go, "What? What's going on?" And like again, I think it is because we're not, really that central. There's no Chinatown to go to, so that's one. And also again, we have speak the language, and we're mostly all Catholics. So some of the challenges, I think, like in the media, I think we need more representation. So that's really, really important. And like in terms of what's going on right now, there are a lot of Filipino nurses who are, like their lives are in jeopardy because of COVID. There's been a lot of kind of nurses and doctors who are dying because of COVID. And yeah, and like I remember there were two shows that were about nurses, like Nurse Jackie, and there's another one by Will Smith's wife, like Jada Pinkett had one too. And also, like when I was watching ER, it's going like, this is our time to like have some kind of representation. And I think in the end of the ER, the last few episodes, there were some Filipino nurses. So I just feel like there's like missed opportunity, but it's not all bad because one thing I love about the current reality shows, I'm not saying all of them, but if there's like a dancing related one, I don't even watch it anymore. Like guaranteed we're gonna win. And cooking, there's like top chefs that's had a number of fashion ones, singing definitely. So it's not all bad because we are all there, but we need some like political representation. I think we're really lacking in terms of representation. But there's Rob Bonta in California, and he's my hero. So things are changing, and so yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, for me, really being not growing up inside of any kind of Filipino or Filipino American culture. I do remember, like, when kids, they go to school, I don't know if they still do this, but it used to be when I was in school, if it was your birthday, you would bring in cupcakes.
Yeah.
My mother doesn't really bake so often, but she does make lumpia. And
Ooh.
lumpia is like I guess in English people would say spring rolls. They're not spring rolls, not egg rolls.
No.
They're much better than that. Anyway, it got to the point where if I was in class with people would ask me, like, on your birthday, is your mom going to make those little rolled fried things again? And it's like, well, of course she will. And my point here is, my experience is that the more that people know about Filipinos, the more that they kind of can connect the dots and be like, oh, I like a lot of Filipino people, and, they tend to be accepting and generous, and they always feed people a lot. So
yeah, and we're like super friendly. So yeah, it's great. Yeah, well, one thing I love about my job right now, because I go to a lot of schools and like suburbs where there's not a lot of diversity, and I get to be sort of like the ambassador of the Philippines. And I guess I talk so positively enough about it, and I share my culture, and I always ask if there are some Filipinos in the audience, and usually there's one or two kids, but sometimes I guess I'm that kind of, like so pro-Filipinos that I would see some blonde kids like mom was, I'm Filipino too. So at that point, like, oh, I kind of done, I've done my job, because growing up in the Philippines, it was so pro-American that I wanted to be an American. So it's kind of reversed. Like, I guess I've been portraying the Philippines so positively that these kids, because a lot of the like adults say, I don't think they ever met a Filipino before. Like, if I am their impression of the Philippines, if it's that positive, then I've done my job. So I like that. I like that answering my work. Even though my work, if you look at my murals, there's nothing really like, like obviously, like blatantly Filipino about it. But the color scheme that I use are very vibrant, tropical, festive. They are very Filipino. So I talk about that aspect of my work.
I mean, honestly, I saw a painting of yours before I ever met you, and immediately I still don't know what it is to this day, but immediately I coded that, and I was like, yeah, that there's something Filipino about that, and I don't know why.
There you go. If it's like kicking in subconsciously, yeah, that's it. I I like sprinkle lumpia crumbs there.
That's what it was. It was just
garlic.
Yeah. So it's almost as if you've kind of I don't know if this is too much to say, but it seems like a lot of things in your life are moving towards you kind of maybe not seeing so much representation. So you've taken it on yourself to almost be an ambassador of sorts.
Definitely.
So if you had like some words for other young Filipino Americans, or maybe Filipinos who have just immigrated to the U.S., and maybe they're feeling kind of alone or cut off, like, what kind of words would you have to say to them?
Well, use your Filipino-ness to your advantage, because folks will embrace it if you portray it, positive enough. It's this fine line between sort of like being really positive versus being really preachy. It's sort of like this fine line where you can really make it appealing and use it to your advantage. I think folks will open up to it, like especially here in Boston, because it is not San Francisco where or like the Bay Area, there are tons of Filipinos. Here it's like folks, like, I believe, are really open to like learning more about us. So I feel fortunate to be here in Boston, to be a Filipino American Filipino American artist in Boston, because I think it would be a lot more challenging in California, where there's a lot of us, a lot of Filipino Americans there. Here, I'm so pretty unique. And I thank you, Massachusetts, for being so open, because I think that is part of the draw, even though I don't, again, blatantly say I'm it's my Filipino side. It is part of it. It's not just art. I have this cultural aspect to my work, and I love it. So be Filipino, be Filipino American. It's fantastic. I love it. It's great.
I'm learning to love it more and more, thanks in part to the opportunities that you have presented me with. So thank you very much for that, Bren.
You're welcome.
Oh, also, one thing that I do want to touch on, because we've been talking about family and art and everything. You have a project that's coming out or it's going to the publishers soon, correct?
Yes. So just recently, so I've been working on a graphic memoir, a graphic novel about my mom, right here. The camera's kind of the opposite. So, and it's going to be published. So it's about my mom and PAWA in San Francisco. They are a arts and literature organization. They will publish my book on my birthday next year, February 15th. So
right.
to go to printers fairly soon. And so I can't believe I'm going to have something published, and I'm so happy about it. So it's sort of like a comic book about my immigration experience, but it centers around my mom. And she passed away 2 years ago. Thank you for having me bring this up.
Well, I mean, it's a tremendous accomplishment. I do hope that we will take a look at it in BFAB one of these days, if the group's open to it, if you're open to it.
It would be an honor.
I know we are almost out of time here, but I do want to mention for people who might be watching that BFAB does exist. As far as I understand it, it's still open to new membership, right?
Yeah, and like especially now, because we typically meet from house to house. You're actually physical, and you bring foods, potluck. But now there's pretty much no limit, because we're just meeting via Zoom. So yeah, it's totally open. If you do want, we still have about 3 minutes. Can I show slides about BFAB?
Sure.
Those are the last 3 slides. So that's our website, and it highlights our current book, which is called The Son of Good Fortune. But prior to reading this, we're not going to meet with the author until in November. So we're going to discuss Grace Luthan's short story this Saturday. But our next book is The Son of Good Fortune. And speaking about fortune, we either have met the authors in person, or we at least Skype or Zoom with them. Almost all of our books. Next slide, please. This is our last meeting by Zoom with AJ Dungo, and you can see Rico there, and me. And so we read this graphic novel, or a memoir. It's fantastic. And next slide, please. And this is how we usually meet. There's about a dozen to 25 of us, and we just hop around from one house to another. And that's another graphic memoir that we just recently read by Malaka Gari. And she's half Egyptian, half Filipina. And her book just won the Arab American Book of the Year. And so it's about her life. And so usually being Filipina and Egyptian. So, yep, that's who we are. That's BFAB.
All those smiling faces.
Yeah.
So I think we do try to land the show on hope. And one thing that has really made me feel hopeful about talking to you today, but in general, is that Bren, I think that you do a great job of embodying that our differences don't have to be alienating to people. We can use them as a way to invite people in. So I really do admire that about not just like your painting and your visual things, but the things that you do in your spare time as well. I know that I'm often working with people and I'm trying to model this for them, but maybe for people at home, they don't know this. Consultants and people that help others out, they also get tired. They also get worn down. And so we kind of need community spaces where we can go to refresh ourselves. And so BFAB, even though I dropped off for a while, it really has very much in my mind and in my heart been a place for me to do that. So thank you once again. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And Bren, thanks very much for being here with us.
Well, Rico, I also admire what you do, and I'm so glad that you are back to BFAB. So, salamat!
That means thank you. So salamat po, everybody. Have a great evening. Until we see each other again, this is Rico Manalo. This is All Aces on Air, and I was joined today by Bren Bataclan.
Thank you. Hello? Are we still on? Hello? Hello?